Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. So it's been a little while, but I want to dive back into the work of the philosopher Nick Land, specifically part of his essay, The Dark Enlightenment, which is, of course, a core piece of text when it comes to NRX political theory. Today, we're going to be talking about the issue of equality. We hear a lot about arguments between equity and equality, what all these things mean, and that these are the core disagreements between kind of the two factions in the American political system. But Nick Land delves a lot deeper into the problems of pretending that all people are indeed equal, and the way that the attempt to enforce that reality into any political system can have a devastating impact when it comes to outcomes and possibly collapse the very structures of your society. So we're going to be reading a passage from the Dark Enlightenment today. But before we get into all that, guys, I do want to remind you that, of course, you know that we are ramping up into election season, and the fact that the Democrats are literally trying to imprison their primary political opponent probably clues you in that this election cycle is going to get pretty wild. We're going to see lots of censorship. They don't want people talking about all of the terrible things that Hunter Biden and other members of the Biden family have done, along with everything else that's going on with the Democrats and the left during the cycle, which means that it's very easy for channels like mine to go ahead and get demonetized or have videos censored. And that's why I rely on the people at The Blaze. Me and so many other hosts are able to speak and say what we want, write what we want, because Blaze enables that. Of course, anything that gets censored or taken down continues to be put over at Blaze TV. So if you want to catch every episode uncensored, making sure that you support the work that's going on here, and also making sure that you can always get all of my work without any kind of censorship, you can go ahead and go to blazetv.com. You can use the promo code Auron to go ahead and get $20 off your subscription for the year. Again, that's blazetv.com and Auron as your promo code to go ahead and get that discount while promoting the show. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and look into this passage from the Dark Enlightenment. This is a much longer essay. In fact, actually, it's finally out as a book. I believe Imperium Press was the press that put it out. So if you'd like to get a physical copy of the Dark Enlightenment, you can do that, and I certainly suggest that you do. It's a fascinating trip. When you do, remember that ultimately this entire essay, or this kind of long form, almost book, small, short book, or long essay, depending on how you want to look at it, uh, is in response to the writings of Curtis Yarvin. So having a basic understanding of Curtis Yarvin's work, Mencius Mollbug's work, the work from Unqualified Reservations, you need to know terms like the cathedral and other kind of key aspects, so that you're not lost with some of that. It really helps to have that before you dive in. But today we're going to read a passage that I think stands on its own. You don't really need to necessarily have that background to understand what Land is talking about here. So we'll go ahead and begin reading. Now, to put this in context, he is writing about a lot of things that happened around kind of the Trayvon Martin shooting. If you remember, they had the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. And, the story from the beginning is that this evil white racist just kind of shot this innocent black child who was wandering through the neighborhood with some tea and some Skittles, just for no reason at all. And ultimately, this showed how dangerous it was to be a black child in the United States. And before we had George Floyd or any of these other, things, it turns out that this phenomenon of kind of race riots and race baiting in response to overblown media hysteria of an event that's intentionally distorted to kind of rile up racial hatred is nothing new. It's actually a pretty common feature of the American political cycle. You can go all the way back to Rodney King and the riots involved in LA. You can go obviously to Trayvon Martin. You can go all the way up to George Floyd and BLM and all of the other different different press manufactured events that have occurred here. But Nick Land is writing this before the events of BLM. Obviously, the things that have happened since have only magnified the truth of kind of what he says here. But that's the context to what he's replying to here. And he starts by laying out an article that the website Jezebel had put out about kind of how dangerous it is to go ahead and be a black man in the United States, and how everyone is racist and everything is racist. And you have to point it all out, to quote a famous video game critiquer. And so they thought it was very important to, of course, spell this out. And he uses this as kind of the launching point for explaining the what the progressive religion does for the revolution, the role that it plays in the revolution. Again, you might feel like you've heard this before, but it's this critique was rather fresh back when it was originally written, and I think it's worth diving into because it's still a lot of stuff that people get uncomfortable with. They don't want to notice, they don't want to pay attention to, they want to pretend isn't a reality. And I think it's important to go ahead and take a look at this because, like I said, he lays out a lot of the ways that the progressive religion is specifically around race is used to create an eternal revolution. The Gramscian revolution was not one of economics, but one of race and sex. It was a cultural revolution, not an economic one. So let's go ahead and dive into the essay here. Again, from The Dark Enlightenment, this is Nick Land. He says, the pop PC police were ready to move on. With the great show trial collapsing into a narrative disorder, it was time to refocus the message. Facts be damned and double damned. Jezebel best exemplifies the hectoring, vaguely hysterical tone. So originally, the story, like I said, had been that Trayvon Martin was this innocent child, and George Zimmerman was this horrible white Klansman who had murdered him in cold blood. And it slowly started to come out that actually George Zimmerman was Hispanic. Not only was he Hispanic, his father was of some kind of Afro descent, and so actually he was part black as well. So this idea of, and so we got this idea of a white Hispanic was the moniker that they were using, and that wasn't even true. So that part fell apart, and then we found out that Trayvon Martin actually had beaten George Zimmerman quite badly. This fact had been obscured by the media from the beginning. The fact that he had the back of his head slammed into the street multiple times, all of this had really clouded this angelic visage of Trayvon Martin that had been originally portrayed. When Barack Obama said they could have been my son, all of a sudden that started to kind of come apart. But the media was not going to stop, right? They're going to double down in the same way that they weren't going to stop when it came out that George Floyd had died from a fentanyl overdose and not from the actions of the police officers. That just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The revolution's already underway. So we bury the story, we bury the facts. We need to go ahead and make sure that the narrative maintains its continued momentum. So here's what Jezebel wrote. They said, "You know how you can tell that black people are still oppressed? Because black people are still oppressed." That's what we call a tautology, folks. If you claim that you're not a racist person, or at least that you're committed to working your ass off, again, sorry for the language here, this is not mine, not to be one, which is really the best that any of us can promise. So again, you can't actually not be racist if you're a white person. You're gonna be racist. So the best you can actually do is just that work your ass off to be an ally, right? But it's original sin. You're marred with it. There's no forgiveness here in the progressive religion. Then you must believe that people are fundamentally born equal. So if that's true, then in a vacuum, factors like skin color should not have any effect on anyone's success, right? So here is the progressive religion, right? Is that everyone is equal, they're all born equal. And so any disparities between any group has to be racism. Because everyone's equal. Everyone's born equal. We all know that because we're not racist. We're super not racist. We all know everyone is born equal. And so therefore, every disparity has to be a social construct, right? And therefore, if you really believe that all people are created equal, then when you see, and that's hilarious because most of these people hate God, but anyway, they hate Christianity for sure. When you see the drastic racial inequalities exist in the world, the only thing you could possibly conclude is that some external force is holding certain people back, like racism, right? And yeah, there it is. That's that progressive religion. So congratulations, you believe in racism, unless you don't actually think people are born equal. And if you don't believe that people are born equal, then you're an effing racist. So again, the logical I guess syllogism here is that you have to believe all people are created equal, but all people are not performing equally. Their outcomes are not equal. Therefore, racism. That's all. That's the only logically consistent outcome you could have here. And of course, to be fair, a lot of conservatives have a problem arguing against this because they believe this, the first part, right? And so they don't have an actual explanation for any other part of it. And so they are often befuddled by this argument because they don't really have an argument against this. Nick Land says, so we're done with his Jezebel quote. Now we're going to Nick Land here. He says, does anyone really believe that people are born equal in the way that is understood here? Believe that is not only that a formal expectation of equal treatment is a prerequisite for civilized interaction, but that any revealed deviation from substantial equality or outcome is an obvious, unambiguous indication of oppression. That's the only thing you could possibly conclude. So he's saying here that does anyone really believe that everyone is just born exactly the same? Now, we're not precluding here, and he doesn't preclude here, that all men are equal in the sight of God, that they have equal worth or equal value, or that God, that we're all equally sinful before the eyes of God. The We're not talking about spiritual value here. And he also says, look, there is a certain level of treating each other as equal. That's just a prerequisite for civilized interaction. If you have a polity like we have in the United States, you got to treat people with kindness and respect if you're going to get along. That's just the reality on the ground. You don't have another option. So we're not precluding the idea that men are equal, are spiritually equal before God, or that that they need to be treated equally in social situations because that's the only way you can really have a civilized society that's going to function. But does anyone really believe that there's just no differences between people? Because as Jezebel says, you better believe that or else, right? Back to Nick Land here. Uh, at the very least, Jezebel should be congratulated for expressing the progressive faith in its purest form, entirely uncontaminated by sensitivity to evidence or certainty of any kind, or uncertainty of any kind, casually contemptuous of any relevant research, whether existent or merely conceivable, and supremely confident about its own moral invincibility. If the facts are morally wrong, so much worse for the facts. That's the only position that could possibly be adopted, even if it's based upon a mixture of wishful thinking, deliberate ignorance, and insulting childish lies. So he's saying he says from the very beginning here, uh obviously, the faith, this is the faith, like this is the spiritual core of the faith, and it is so thoroughly believed that no evidence can even enter into this. If you have any evidence to the contrary, if you notice that perhaps even for a moment the emperor might not be clothed in the finest of regalia, but actually is naked, you're the problem. Actually, you're probably evil and you need to be removed from society or reprogrammed immediately. Let's get you to those camps, get you re-educated, right? And no facts are allowed to enter into this discussion. We're announcing this truth. It's a metaphysical truth. We believe it wholly, and this is an axiom that cannot be challenged. Don't you bring any science in here. If you bring any science in here, we're not even going to conceive of the idea that the science could be available, right? And this is the refrain you get from a lot of people. Well, we can't have any evidence. We don't want to know if people are unequal. Even if we have the ability to collect the data, even if we have the ability to research this, we shouldn't even be doing that because we cannot. We might need to know the science about everything else. Science. We may need to trust the science everywhere else. But this is the one time we don't want to know. If we do know, it's wrong. It's all a lie. People are equal. The end. To call the belief in a substantial human equality a superstition is to insult superstitions. It might be unwarranted to believe in leprechauns, but at least the person who holds to such a belief isn't watching them not exist for every waking hour of the day. Human inequality, in contrast, and in all of its abundant multiplicity, is consistently on display as people exhibit their variations in gender, ethnicity, physical attractiveness, size, and shape, strength, health, agility, charm, humor, wit, industriousness, and sociability, among countless other features, traits, abilities, and aspects of their personality. Some immediately and conspicuously, some slowly and over time. So Land is just saying, look, this is super obvious. And you have to have spent your entire life being thoroughly indoctrinated and threatened with the most severe punishments in the world to not notice that people are different. People are born with different abilities. People are born with different, advantages and disadvantages, and those things have a severe impact on their lives. They have some of them are obvious, some of them are not so obvious, but they are always there. And to deny this, he says, it makes more sense to believe in a leprechaun because at least you don't spend every day in and out looking around and seeing leprechauns not existing. But you do see that with humans that there is always a difference. Every day, like when kids go to school, before they know they're supposed to pretend that people are all equal, they recognize that some kids are fast and some kids are slow and some kids are smart and some kids are stupid and some kids are beautiful and some kids are ugly and some kids have a high moral character and some kids are are horribly antisocial and destructive. They know all of these things. They can recognize all of these things. No one has to explain to them that these things are true. And they often sort themselves according to these things and make judgments based on these things. And it takes a whole lot of progressive brainwashing to get rid of this idea that people are indeed different. And pretending like they aren't is something that is just an incredible amount of, he says it's an insult to superstitions. That's how insane it is. To absorb even the slightest fraction of all of this and to conclude is in the only way possible that is either nothing at all or a social construct and index of oppression is sheer Gnostic delirium, a commitment beyond all evidence to the existence of a true and good world veiled by appearance. So he's saying, look, if you see all of this, if you observe this day in day out, if you live in the real world and you see this truth, and you can just go ahead and stack all of this under the heading of social construct. It's all made up. It's all it's all imposed from the top down. When this is literally the most natural phenomenon you can observe. Like right next to people have to eat or they die is people are different, right? Like this is one of the most basic things that you can observe about the human condition. And yet somehow people are entering into the sheer Gnostic delirium of committing themselves to this belief beyond all evidence and saying that the whole thing is a lie, everything is a lie, all data, just every. I don't even need data. I don't need to make this some kind of extreme rationalistic thing, though I could absolutely do that. Just the most simple observations throughout all of history could see exactly what we're talking about here. Back to Land. People are not equal. They do not develop equally. Their goals and achievements are not equal, and nothing can make them equal. Substantial equality has no relation to reality, except as it's systematic negation. So he says, look, this is the only way, the only relationship this has to reality, this belief that all people are born entirely equal with all the same abilities and all the same traits. The only relationship this has into reality is that it negates reality, is that it's the exact opposite of observable reality. That's how insane it is to invest in this myth. Uh, Violence on a genocidal scale is required to even approximate to a practical egalitarian program. And if anything less ambitious is attempted, people get around it, some more completely than others. So he says, look, if you want to, this is so obviously true. And the fact that natural differences exist is so obviously correct and so baked in to reality that the only way that you could possibly change that reality is basically to go ahead and uh, initiate a program of what would basically be like violence on a genocidal scale to hold back or reshape the world and try to make it, the way that you envision it, this level of equality, um this vision of equal outcomes. That's what it would take. And if you don't do that, if you don't impose that reality with an incredible amount of totalitarian power and violent force, then people will get around it. They have to, right? And this is communism, right? A lot of people are going to recognize what we're talking about here. It's communism. That's what's necessary. Communism is delirious, right? It is insane. You cannot make people equal. You cannot force equality onto to the world. It is a violation of the human condition. And the only way you could even imagine implementing a project of this scale is complete totalitarian control and incredible violence, which is what socialism did, is what communism did, right? Communist countries had to slaughter tens of millions of people. It had to control every aspect of society, every aspect of the economy, every aspect of social interaction in order to create the world that they thought should exist. And they still failed. Even with all of that power and all of that violence and all of that control and all of that propaganda, they still failed because it's so against nature. And what Land is saying is that the economic project that communism attempted in countries like Russia or China failed there. And so instead, in the United States and other Western nations, the revolution came in the form of race and sex and all these other cultural culture war issues, right? And the same project has been attempted in those countries. The same level of denial of reality has existed in those countries. We recognize that the Gramscian Revolution, you'll hear, Chris Rufo will, he wrote a great book about this, about how the Cultural Revolution was perpetrated, how the Long March of the Institutions took place, how the ideology was enforced, right? But the reason a lot of this was able to be enforced is in many ways the reason that the leftist revolution took hold, in not in the economic sense in the West, but in this culture war sense, in this axis of race and sex and gender and all these things. The reason it took hold is that in the West we had kind of made this promise, right? We had said, look, all people are going to be equal. Now on the right, a lot of people say, well, equality of opportunity and not of outcome. And that's great, right? I actually do think there should be equality of opportunity. I think ultimately that is the way you need to operate your society. But unfortunately, when people hear equality of opportunity, they expect equality of outcome. Because as Jezebel pointed out in the progressive religion post earlier above, if you have equal opportunity and you don't get equal outcomes, then people are going to be looking for explanations. And the explanation they're going to accept is not going to be, well, you just generally don't perform as well. Actually, when we got free markets and we've got open and equality and all these things, Actually, many people just fail and they don't do well, and they're always going to be kind of doomed to the bottom, and that's just going to be the way it is. People are not going to accept that. That's not a good explanation, and so they look for systemic explanations. Well, the game is rigged against me. It's about race. It's about my gender. It's about my sexual orientation. There has to be a reason that me and many people from my community consistently perform below others. And it's definitely not going to be because, well, when it came to equal opportunity, we didn't win the race. That's not going to be an acceptable explanation. It's not going to be just work harder and figure it out. People are not going to stand for that, especially when the results keep coming back and over again. When the same people keep ending up in the same positions in the stack, people are going to notice patterns and they're not going to like them. And so the communist revolution in the West was oriented on race and gender. Guys like Chris Rufo absolutely get that correct. Vocal distance, these guys, they're even James Lindsay, give him credit here. They're absolutely correct that that's the axis that it took place on. But the reason it can take place on that that axis is that we are in denial about the truth that people are unequal and that those inequalities will show up consistently in a society that does provide equal outcome or equal opportunities. Equal outcomes will not appear, and because different outcomes consistently appear, people will not be okay with that. People will blame the system. They will not take that as a acceptable explanation for what has happened, and therefore they will say, well, then I guess we need to give the government infinite power in order to make things equal. If me and my friends cannot consistently perform at the top and get the things promised to us by equal opportunity, we will manufacture equal outcomes, right? And that's what so much of the civil rights revolution and the gender revolution and the sexual revolution, everything else in the United States has been about. Is we were promised equal opportunity. We didn't have it at first. We have it now, but then when we got it, it didn't change everything. Actually, much of the data stayed the same, or even got worse in some cases. And now we have to blame the system. Back to land here. To take only the most obvious example, anybody with more than one child knows that nobody is born equal. Monozoic, sorry, I don't know how to, I should know how to pronounce that, but I don't. Twins and clones, perhaps accepted. Zygotic, that's what I should go with there. In fact, everyone is born different in innumerable ways, even when, as is normally the case, the implications of these differences for life outcomes are difficult to confidently predict. So, one of the nice things, one of the problems with over analyzing genetics is it used to be that life was a lot more of a mystery, right? That we recognize that there were many factors that went into people's successes and failures. And while there are plenty of really smart people out there, a lot of them end up, doing nothing with their lives, destroying themselves or throwing their lives away, getting caught up in wastes of time, not reaching their potential. So simply having genetic advantages is insufficient, in the area of IQ. And this happens to be the case with other things as well. But ultimately, if you go ahead and analyze all this and map it all out for people, then there's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where we say, well, only these traits matter. We've created a society where only these specific traits matter. And genetically, you're predisposed to have an advantage or a disadvantage in that area. And therefore, your life story is already written for you, right? When we didn't have that, then people felt like they were far more in control of certain aspects of their life. They could win or lose in different areas. Maybe you aren't the smartest person in the world, but you're highly sociable. Maybe you're not highly sociable, but you're very strong. Maybe you're very brave. It takes all cut types, right? And that doesn't mean everybody wins. There are people who are just like sickly and awful, people, and just stupid. Like they just failed on everything. They lost the genetic lottery in all areas, and also they're just a bad character. And so, like, it's not that every single person has like these deeply redeeming qualities, but there's much more of a sense of there are all these innumerable things that go into success, and the way they play themselves out is there's a lot of variability, and you don't feel like your whole life is locked in and wired in just because you got a certain score on a test or something. But today, because we're so hyper specialized and because we spend so much time aggregating data and studying everything, trying to plan things out, people feel trapped by a lot of these, data. They don't feel like they are individually, independently in control of their destiny. They feel like they're locked into kind of just this aggregate of all the data coming in. Back to land here. He says, uh, where did I leave off? Even as in normal cases, the implications of these differences for life outcomes are difficult to confidently predict. Their existence is undeniable, or at least sincerely undeniable. Of course, sincerity or even minimal cognitive coherence is not remotely the issue here. Jezebel's position, whilst impeccable in its political correctness, is not only factually dubious, but rather laughably absurd and actually, strictly speaking, insane. So he says, look, maybe we didn't know these things, maybe it was hard to figure out, but we knew that they existed, right? Even if we used to not be able to quantify a lot of these things, and I would argue we still can't properly quantify this. I think that a lot of the confidence in predictive models and the confidence in predictive data is overblown. I don't think everyone's life is mapped out just because we happen to have a specific score on them. I think there's more to life and the destiny and so much about who we are. I'm not a strict materialist. I don't think that you can just give me a paper with your IQ score and uh, your some other functions, and all of a sudden I know everything about you. But he said, "Look, we knew these things still existed. We knew these factors did exist, even if we didn't have some perfect mapping. But that doesn't matter. Like even the most obvious observations from 1,000 years ago about the fact that people are different would be unacceptable to Jezebel, right? Because that's not what they believe. That's not what they need for kind of the progressive religion. It dogmatizes a denial of reality so extreme that nobody could genuinely maintain or even entertain it, let alone plausibly explain or defend it. It's a tenet of faith that cannot be understood but only asserted or submitted to as madness made law or authoritarian religion. So what he's saying here is, look, they don't care about any facts. There's a lot of people on the right made this mistake in like 2015. They thought that if they brought enough facts about like differences between people, they brought enough scientific facts on this, that would matter. It quickly became very, very obvious to them that those facts don't matter. They don't impact any of this. They actually don't even put a crack in the edifice of this religion. This is something to be taken on faith. And in fact, the fact that you take it on faith is a mark of allegiance. Curtis Yarvin has um, uh, this great turn of phrase, nonsense as a uniform, or as I rephrased it, clown world as a uniform, where just your belief in these absurdities is actually useful to the regime, because anyone can believe a fact, right? Like anyone can just say, oh, the sky is blue, and we all believe the sky is blue. Like there's no, there's no value to that as a regime. But if a regime is trying to exercise power and it can get you to parrot back things that are obviously false, obviously a lie, like all people are equal and there are no differences between people. If they can get you to say something that is so obviously untrue that you will embarrass yourself, you will fall prostrate before them and utter this, even though you can observe right in front of you that it's a lie, then that shows them that you are loyal. It is as a uniform. It's nonsense as a uniform, and that is extremely useful. It's like getting everyone to wear an armband that says, "I believe in the regime. I am loyal to the regime. I am so loyal that I will openly deny obvious facts. I do not care. Facts cannot impact my feelings, buddy. Send Ben Shapiro fact packing. The facts can just not impact what I am believing here." That's what he's talking about. Back to land in the essay. The political commandment of this religion is transparent. Accept progressive social policy as the only possible solution to the sin. You see it crossed out there. He's crossed out sin. Problem of inequality. So this is the key function here, right? This is why it's so important. This is a source of eternal power for the regime. People are unequal. That is just a fact of the reality. It's so obviously observable that to deny it is absurd, as Land has said quite comically here through some fun language. This is so obviously true that anyone willing to deny it is clearly bought into this religion. And because this thing is so obviously true that people are not equal, the 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 power needed to make it true is infinite. It's infinite in the same way that the power to need to make people economically equal in communism is infinite. So this is a source of infinite eternal revolution, right? Infinite energy for eternal revolution. You need all the power in the world all the time. You need all the obedience. You need everyone to be lying to themselves and everyone else all the time. And if you allow them to tell the truth or notice the truth at any moment, that could shatter the illusion of equality. So you absolutely need totalitarian control. You need the total state at all times to enforce this level of unreality. Because if you don't, the whole thing could come apart. Whole thing could come apart. And so this is the utility that the faith has for the regime. Now, I'd like to say, as always, they both believe this is true and this is useful for power. Okay, they believe this. These are true believers. They have the faith, even if all the evidence is just right in front of them. They don't care. They believe it, and they believe they have the righteous duty to enforce it. However, it's also useful for their power. It gives them a ruling formula, a political formula that enables them to demand infinite power from their people all the time. And this is the function in the West of this ideology. It is gay race communism, right? It's communism, but for your sexuality, your skin color, your gender, all of these things instead of for economics, right? And that utility is the utility of that is the infinite power for eternal revolution. The commandment is a categorical imperative. No possible fact could undermine, complicate, or revise it. If progressive social policy actually results in an exacerbation of the problem, fallen reality is to blame, since the social malady is obviously worse than had been originally envisaged, and only redoubled efforts in the same direction can hope to remedy it. So it's like, not only is this thing like a religious fervor, but the progressive social policy is the only acceptable solution. And even if it looks like, even if your lying eyes tell you, even if the data tells you that actually the solution is failing and the progressive solution is actually maybe even making things worse, that can't be true. That cannot be true. That's heresy. You take that back. That's heresy. It's impossible for the policy to be making things worse. Instead, we just underestimated how racist or sexist or homophobic the people were. And we need more power to reconstruct the chuds, right? We need more power to reconstruct the unrepentant white middle class racist evangelical Christian males. We need to re-educate them until finally we can make everyone equal all the time. That there is no, the policy never fails. It simply has not been done hard enough. That is the only explanation for failure. Only acceptable explanation for failure. The only answer is to double and triple down on the process. There can be nothing to learn in matters of faith. Eventually, systematic social collapse teaches the lesson that chronic failure and incremental deterioration could not communicate. That's a macro scale social Darwinism for dummies, and that's the way that civilizations end. So he says, basically, when your civilization is so determined that this is the only solution, and this is their political formula, this is how they gain power, so they're deeply invested in it, they're never going to walk it back. If that's the way that your society is structured, then it is specifically not allowed to notice when there's systemic social collapse or chronic failures. Like the fact that you have these small pieces failing one at a time, that cannot be noticed. And even when you have the larger issues falling apart, you can't notice it, right? You can't notice that the planes don't land like they used to. You can't notice that the cities are unsafe. You can't notice that everything is dirty. You can't notice that people have to lock up the products in their stores so that no one can actually go shopping anymore. You can't notice all of those little things. It's illegal. It's immoral. You're a racist if you notice. You're a sexist if you notice. You're a homophobe if you notice that there's a problem with the public education, that your kids aren't learning how to read, write, or any of that stuff, but they do want to transition when they're 9 years old. You can't notice any of that stuff. Noticing that stuff is heresy. You will be burned in public for doing it. But he says eventually the social cost comes due. Like you can't take all of your social capital and burn it to try to create this equality. You can't take total social control forever in an attempt to make force everyone to be equal and just have that going in perpetuity. In the same way, the Soviet Union and other communist countries couldn't maintain actual communist economic policies and continue to exist. Some of them collapsed entirely from attempting to dedicate themselves to strict social, communist policies, Marxist policies. Others like China, adapted and basically created a hybrid version of a capitalism that actually worked with a totalitarian government. But you cannot continue to deny reality. You may have gathered all of the power in the world together in an attempt to create equality through the communist revolution, but eventually reality breaks through. And if you have structured your entire society around not being able to notice what's failing, then collapse is what solves that problem. That's how civilizations end. When things get so bad that and you're not allowed to notice, it's illegal to notice how bad they're getting. And eventually just you burn every piece of social fabric that you have, attempting to hold this lie together, and you consolidate all power unto yourself. And then your society just falls apart because you've stripped all of the things that make your society work out in an attempt to create this artificial equality that simply cannot exist in the real world. And you made it illegal to notice, so you can't take any corrective action. And eventually it all just comes apart. So that's what Land is saying here, is in the same way that the attempt for communists to make economic equality the religion of the state, and to create all power unto itself, gather all power unto itself. In the same way that failed because it was battling against a fact of nature. It seems like a source of infinite power at first, right? Because there's always inequality, and so there's the power of the eternal revolution is there for you. But you are warping your society so badly and burning what makes a society down so quickly as fuel for your power that eventually you just collapse as a society. And Western societies are doing the same thing here now with social issues. We're in the same way that communist countries did it with economic issues, we're doing with culture war issues. And the consequences are obvious. We can see them all around us. We all know the consequences of believing in this religion, and yet we continue to do them because no one's allowed to notice them. You're not allowed to notice failed social policy. You're not allowed to notice that's making things worse. If you do, it'll destroy your life. So everyone just doubles down, and everything gets worse until these things come apart. That is the good news, is that when they come apart, eventually, that things can get better. Russia is in a better state than it was under communism, for sure. Whatever other problems you might have with Russia, the Russian people are certainly in a better place than they were when people were starving for lack of grain. And the same thing can be true in the West as well. But of course, you have to go through a very unpleasant period. Russia certainly did. The end of the Soviet Union and kind of the early '90s, when they were ruled just by oligarchs, was certainly not great times to be Russian. And so it's a bitter pill, right? It's kind of a bitter white pill. You know that these things can't last and they will come apart, and you know that things will eventually get better. But you have to go through a point of very difficult times in order to get to the end. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move over to our questions of the people here real quick. Looks like we have Creeper Weirdo who says, look, Oren. Oh, sorry. Put you on screen. Look, Oren, that woke you're pointing out, it's going to get put away any day now. Any day now. Yes. Again, this is why my thesis is that the woke can't be put away. This is why I feel confident in my ability to defeat academic agents, because we are in the same process, in the same way that the Soviet Union burned itself out, attempting to kind of be Marxist. The West is going to burn itself out, attempting its own version of a communist revolution. Now, I mean, there's always, the China did course correct, right? So maybe AA will be right. Maybe we have the Chinese equivalent of the elites, and they are willing to pivot away. They'll still call it something, but they'll pivot away from the worst part of wokeness and keep the society going. But I have to say, I do definitely doubt that is the case. Let's see. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move over. Oh, nope, we got everybody. Okay. All right. Well, then we will go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for coming by. Of course, if it's your first time on the channel, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe. Make sure that you turn on notifications. Make sure that you go ahead and click that bell so you can catch these streams when they go live. If you'd like to go ahead and get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you can subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do, leave a rating or review. It helps with the algorithm. If you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can go ahead and do that on Amazon. You can do that on Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. All the major retailers should have ability to get that. Or, of course, you can get it through your local bookstore. Support them as well. And I will be at the Old Glory Club meetup. They have sold out. They did sell their last few tickets. So if you have not gotten tickets, sorry, you cannot attend. But for those who have, I really look forward to meeting you. I know a lot of people in the audience were there last time. It was a pleasure to meet you. I'm looking forward to meeting even more people from the audience there this time. It's a really fantastic, exciting time to get together with everybody. Everybody has a lot of fun, so looking forward to it. Thank you once again, everybody, for coming by. And as always, I will talk to you next time.